Hey guys, it's Bailey. Welcome back to the channel. This is going to be a quick review, or as quick as it can be, because I have a lot of information to go over and a lot of comparisons to draw here. It's going to be a review nonetheless of the brand new palettes, eyeshadow palettes from L'Oreal. They are the La Palette Nude 1 and La Palette Nude 2. If you want to learn more about these and hear my thoughts, what I think about them, let's get into it. For starters, each of these palettes contains 10 eyeshadow shades and retails for 15 bucks a piece. I found mine at Walmart if you guys are still having trouble finding them, since they are still slowly rolling out in stores. $15 might seem like a lot for the drugstore, and it is, but relative to other larger palettes available, because it seems like that has been a trend is among lots of drugstore brands, is to release palettes with more shadow options inside. By comparison, the nudes from Maybelline and the other similar palettes like this, they contain about half the product, but 12 different shadow options. First, let's start with the La Palette Nude 1. This contains overall more browns, more neutral shades, whereas the La Palette Nude 2, I don't think should be called nude because it's more so mauves and really purpley plums. That's neither here nor there. We're talking about the first palette first. So inside here you can see the spectrum of neutral shadows. You have some great light shades over here that fade into the deeper, darker browns, and then you kind of have some cooler silvery grays over on this side. There's a great mix of textures in here, both matte and shimmery. None of them get too shimmery though, not overwhelmingly shimmery, and certainly no glitter. And there are even some shades that I would say are solid satin finishes because they don't contain like discernible glitters or shimmers, but they're definitely not matte. Still very flattering. This is the palette that I'm wearing on my eyes today, and I really stuck to these sort of actually they're really the deepest shadows in the palette. That's one thing that you can say about these, is that they really don't get too dark, and that can be both good and bad. If you really like to have that stark contrast of a black or a super dark shadow in your palettes, you're not really going to get that from here, but you still do get a solid contrast. You get creams, some golds, some chocolate browns, some cooler browns, and then once again those cooler silvery shades. Overall, I feel like there's not a whole lot to say about this palette. It's pretty great. The shadows are of amazing quality. They're really pigmented. They're really finely milled, so whether you're working with shimmer, a satin, a matte, they feel very, very like buttery, soft, and fine. Some of the smoothest I've ever tried from the drugstore. Some of the matte shadows can get a little chalky, but not patchy chalky, if this even makes any sense. It's not that you apply them and they go on patchy. It's more like you apply them and so much powder is coming off that they look a little dry, and they have a tendency to lean more cakey than patchy, which I personally prefer. If a shadow is going to be chalky, I prefer it to be similar to these because I feel like it's easier to work with. So they're not perfection, but for a $15 palette from the drugstore, I think they are pretty great. But of the two palettes, this is probably the one that you're going to find is most easily dupable with palettes you might already have in your collection, namely, and I think a lot of people are going to draw this conclusion, the Naked 1 palette. Now, overall, I think there are some similar shades in here, but for the most part, Urban Decay's shadows are a little bit more pigmented. There are some more extremes in here because you have that gunmetal gray, you have a deep shimmery black, you have a brighter gold. These kind of sit more in the middle of the road, so people who want shadows for more everyday purposes and not really bright, flashy neutrals, this is going to be more so your comfort zone. That being said though, there are a lot of similarities between the two, and so if you're not interested in what is ultimately a more subdued version of the Naked palette, this might be a pass for you. The other similar palette, at least in terms of color variety, is the Nudes palette from Maybelline, and a lot of people, all of these palettes from Maybelline, people have been very polarized on. They either really love them, they're willing to work with what is kind of a more difficult formula from the drugstore, or they absolutely hate them. They're like, I'd rather invest in a Naked palette or a similar high-end palette. They wouldn't waste their money. Overall, I have to say that once again, the color palettes are very similar between the two. There aren't that many dupable shades, but once again, even though these Maybelline shadows provide a little bit more contrast, a little bit more flash, the shimmery shadows are a little bit more shimmery than those you'll find in the L'Oreal. I think what you're ultimately looking at is, once again, just a more subdued version of the other palette. But keep in mind, the shadow quality in the L'Oreal, I think, is loads better than those in the Maybelline. So those of you who are still looking for a good neutral drugstore palette, you're definitely going to want to reach for the L'Oreal over the Maybelline. Now let's talk about La Palette Nude 2. Like I said before, I don't understand why they called it a neutral palette. This really is a purple palette, I think, to its core. It has lots of smoky gray mauves over here, and then really turns into straight up purples on the other side. So nude, not so much. You definitely got to be a color lover, I think, to embrace this palette. But regardless of what you consider yourself, if you like it, I recommend it because just like the La Palette Nude 1, the shadow quality is awesome. This also contains a mix of shimmery, satin, matte shades. All of them perform just as well as they did in La Palette 1. It's just that you're instead getting some purple shadows. And I think I said this before, but this was a lot harder to find duplicates for in palettes that already exist. For instance, a lot of you guys were asking about similarities between this palette and the blushed nudes from Maybelline, and the truth is there aren't any shadows that are similar between the two. Once again, Maybelline provides a little bit more higher contrast. The shimmers are a little bit more shimmery, whereas these are more subdued. And this is really more pink tone shadows, whereas this is strictly purple. Same goes for the Urban Decay Naked 3. It too is more overwhelmingly pink, and the mauves that you're going to find in the La Palette Nude 2 are way more purple than those that you're going to find in the Naked 3. But just like La Palette Nude 1, this is a really subdued palette as well. You don't get a stark black or a bright flashy illuminator shade. It's relatively middle of the road, which I think some people are absolutely going to love because you get all that and you get the fantastic shadow quality to boot, and some people are going to want to leave because they're looking for a little bit more from their palettes. But regardless, if these were something you're interested in, I really recommend you checking them out because, like I said, they're some of the best quality shadows I've tried from the drugstore. And don't let the price tag scare you away because yes, they're on the more expensive side for palettes that you'll find in the drugstore, but I think they're very worth it for the quality that they provide. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this review and comparison helped. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.